After I graduated from college, I stayed on as a temporary employee in my department, which just happened to be chemistry. Because I wasn't a grad student or a real employee, I was stuck doing all the crap work. That meant a lot of late nights in the lab doing cleanup work and basic experiment prep for the next day. One late night, I was busy doing work when I saw a shadowy figure outside the window. He seemed to be staring in at me, but when I looked out at him, he would skulk into the shadows. At first I shrugged it off, because it wasn't uncommon for a drunk student to find himself wandering aimlessly around the campus, not really knowing where they were. I kept on working, but I would check out the windows from time to time, and I could swear I saw someone, but they were lost in the shadows. I kept on working until I heard a door slam down the corridor. During the day, I wouldn't have worried about it, but at night, very few people came into the building after hours. Sure, a few employees had keycard access after 9 p.m., but those were few and far between. But I also know people prop doors open too. So much for security. I knew my lab was locked up, so I went about my work, but that lasted until I saw a face in the window of my lab door. It startled me. It wasn't a fellow employee, and it wasn't a drunk student. It was a man with greasy hair and dark, menacing eyes, and he was staring in at me. Those eyes said that he wanted something. But I was behind a locked door, so he tried the doorknob, but there was no way he was getting in. For a moment, I saw anger flash on the man's face, but then he disappeared from view. I was left to wonder if I should call the campus police or not. Then I wondered what I would tell them, that some weirdo was hanging out in the building. So I decided it wasn't worth it just then, and I went back to work. 5 minutes later, I heard the crash of breaking glass down the hallway. That's when a voice in the back of my head told me to call the campus police. But my rational mind said I should check it out first. Maybe someone was staying late just like me, and they dropped a beaker or something. My rational mind said calling the police was going a little bit overboard, at least right then. It's those sort of rationalizations that get us into real trouble at times. And this was one of those times. When I stepped into the hallway, I quickly spotted broken glass on the floor in front of the lab next to mine. Of course, I was stupid and I had to go check it out first. I got about 10 feet from the broken glass when the man with the greasy hair and dark eyes came out of the doorway. As soon as he spotted me, he started right for me. I reeled around and took off running. He yelled for me to stop, but I wasn't going to do that. I just kept running as he shouted after me. My big problem was that I'd left my cell phone in the lab, so there was no calling the campus police. The man kept yelling, but I stopped listening and I just kept running. I had one thing going for me, and that was that I knew the building better than him. I heard his footsteps behind me, racing to catch up to me, but I just kept running. I ended up taking a side hallway and then ran into the basement, which wasn't the best idea because it meant I could be trapped down there. But again, I knew my way around. In the basement, there was a partially hidden corridor that very few people knew about. I made my way back toward the corridor as the man was coming down the stairs after me. I had a head start, so I shot for that corridor and I picked up speed. Then I cut into that corridor. I heard the man's footsteps coming closer and closer, so I just stayed still. Then after about a minute, his footsteps seemed to get further and further away from me. I listened and I listened some more. Then they were gone. I got out of there and ran to the other side of the building and up the stairs and out of the building. I found an emergency campus phone and called the campus cops. Within 5 minutes, 3 police cars showed up and they ended up hauling the man out of the building. It turned out the guy was a drug fiend and he was hoping to find anything in our labs. Not that we had anything for him, but desperate times meant desperate measures, I guess. I was a lot more careful when I was in the building at night after that. Have you ever worked with someone so out of control you think they just might explode in homicidal violence one day? This is my story. We worked in a cross-manufacturing tech startup. The idea all came from the big boss, who was truly brilliant, but was also a cheap taskmaster. He forced us to work 16 hours a day to bring his dream to reality, by promising that we would all get rich from it. In the back of my head, I thought he might get rich, but I was hoping I would make a little bit of money. It wasn't the best environment. In fact, it was a bit of a powder keg. We had one high-strung member on the team. He was a low-level engineer that I quickly spotted was in over his head. The hours and the stress started to wear on him, eroding his mild-mannered attitude, leaving behind a seething ball of rage. After 2 months, he threw daily temper tantrums, sometimes even busting up some of the prototypes, literally stomping them on the floor. I was on front-end design, but I spent a lot of time with the engineers going over prototypes and other design issues. Every time I met with the engineers, it was like walking on eggshells, as this guy was a hothead, ready to blow at any moment. Of course, he was the biggest topic of conversation, and after one really bad moment, someone took it up to the CEO, and the guy was let go. It was not a pretty departure, and he said some pretty nasty things that borderlined on threats when he left. There's a tension with threats like that. Do you take them seriously, or was it just his final eruption? We learned later that it wasn't his final act. 2 days later, he returned to the office and he came armed and loaded. He shot one of our team members in the parking lot and then another in the lobby. It was total chaos after that. My office was in the back corner, and I was too frightened to make a run for it. So I hunkered down behind my desk as he stalked up and down the hallways, cursing and shooting. It seemed to take forever for the police to get there. At one moment, he stopped outside my door, and I could hear him breathing in and out, and he reminded me of a bull. He yelled something, but I was so scared that I couldn't even make it out. I was certain that in any moment he was coming in the room to kill me. It was just then that the police arrived, and that was enough of a distraction for him. I half expected him to run, but he must have known somewhere, deep down inside, that there was no coming back from this. So he found an empty office and ended his life. Let me tell you, that was the longest 15 minutes of my life. I'd been working the night shift at a local convenience store out in a rural town. It wasn't a mom or pop place, but a part of a larger chain of stores. That said, it wasn't very upscale. For the most part, it was quiet, and I got to read books, listen to podcasts, and play games on my phone. But that didn't mean I didn't have to pay attention. It always seemed like a full moon, brought no shortage of crazies though. Sometimes it was drunks, sometimes it was people on drugs, and the majority of those people were mostly harmless. Notice I said the majority and not everyone. One night it was a full moon and I was working, and it was past 2 a.m. and this big hulking guy walked in. His eyes were red and they were darting all over the store, but they always came back to me, as if this guy were checking me out. Let me tell you, this set off my alarm bells. But again, most people that came in just bought something and left with no trouble. This guy stalked around the store, checking out the beer section, then going to the candy aisle, and then finally standing near the back of the store. All the while he looked less and less around the store and more at me, as if he were sizing me up as a threat. I'm not a big person. In fact, I'm small, and this guy would probably be 2 of me. After a while, I couldn't focus on my book any longer, and I'm just watching him. He's standing down the aisle, just glaring at me. Suddenly, he nods his head twice, as if he's giving himself permission for what he's about to do. And I knew I was in trouble. He headed straight for me. I'm sweating bullets. For some reason, I don't just run out of the place, jump in my car, and peel out of there. He's at the counter in 3 long steps, saying, "I want all the money. Don't do anything, or I will have to hurt you." We've been trained not to put up any resistance, and I had no plans to do that. This is not my money, and this is not my store. But still, there's this thing inside me. Call it being indignant at being threatened. The owner installed what he called a panic button. He never told us exactly how it worked and what it did, but he implied that it would bring the police. Really a fat lot of good that would do me because the sheriff's office was over 20 minutes away. Anyway, I told the robber I would give him the money, but while I was doing it, I pressed the panic button. That's when a loud mechanical click came from both entrance doors. I mean, it was loud, and both me and the robber knew what it meant. We were locked inside with each other. The robber's eyes narrowed and I saw nothing but a seething rage flowing out of him. That's when I knew I was going to die that night. I was locked inside the store with a homicidal maniac. But then, after a few moments, it was like a dark cloud of anger passed over him. He said, "I said I wouldn't hurt you, and I meant it. But I still want the money. Give it to me now, and I won't have to hurt you. If you don't, I will make you very, very sorry." I never moved so fast in my life. I ripped the money out of the register and stuffed it into his hands. But I still knew we were locked inside the store together and there was no way out. Or at least that's what I thought. The man stalked over to the entrance door, reared back his boot, and proceeded to kick the glass out of the door. This was thick tempered glass, and he kicked it out like it was made out of wet cardboard. In less than 30 seconds, I was alone in the store, close to hyperventilating. The deputy showed up 10 minutes later, then the owner came 20 minutes after that. The owner was pissed that I didn't put up a fight, but the deputy was a good guy and came to my defense. I looked for a new job the following week and got out of the convenience store clerk business as fast as I could.